Tonight, a dangerous outbreak of E. coli from bad spinach has gotten worse. How worried should Americans be about the food they may have in their homes? Facing a revolt in his own party over his plan for interrogating prisoners, the president warns Congress, agree with him or face the consequences. There is outrage erupting across the Muslim world tonight over something the Pope said. And tonight we're in Havana, Cuba, where the man not pictured here is making news. Also tonight, our look at the risky business of getting from here to America.
It's capsized. It's fully up.
This is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, reporting tonight from Havana.
And good evening from Havana, Cuba, the host city for what is called the Summit of Non-Aligned Nations. In short, all of the enemies of the United States, really, gathered in one room. Their host happens to be the longest-serving ruler of any nation on earth. Fidel Castro has outlasted 9 U.S. presidents. And while he is currently hospitalized, sitting out this conference after transferring power here to his brother Raul, this is still very much every bit Castro's Cuba. In a moment, more on this gathering. We actually have a lot of news to report here tonight, including President Bush's news conference in Washington today, and a major health warning this evening following an outbreak in the U.S. that has a lot of Americans worried about the produce in their homes. There has been an E. coli bacteria outbreak in at least 20 different states with over 90 cases and 1 death reported. And the fear now is that it spreads even further. NBC's Tom Costello is with us to start us off from Washington tonight. Tom, good evening.
Brian, good evening to you. We're talking about spinach, the raw bagged spinach that Americans have in the refrigerators. And today, grocery store chains across the country have been clearing their shelves of it, families throwing it in the trash after the FDA warned that this, regardless of the brand, may be making a lot of people very sick. Across the country, an urgent race to trace the origins of a deadly form of E. coli that seems to be spreading unchecked.
It is a particularly unpleasant kind of E. coli, 0157H7. It can cause serious illness, kidney failure, and in some cases death.
One of those infected, Gwen Wellborn in Oregon, still recovering from an E. coli infection that left her in the hospital for 2 weeks. To have an exact location pinpointed on the source of this particular E. coli contamination by early next week. Meantime, doctors are warning that children and the elderly are especially vulnerable to this kind of E. coli. Brian?
All right, Tom Costello in Washington tonight to start us off. And for more on this story, we want to welcome Dr. Nancy Snyderman, who has joined us at NBC News as our chief medical editor and making, in fact, her nightly news debut this evening. And Nancy, a whole lot of households are watching this across the country that have at least 1 bag of that kind of processed mixed greens in their refrigerator. What should those people do about that?
Brian, there's no wiggle room here. You have to throw it out. The FDA is really saying play it safe. So whether it's bagged spinach, fresh spinach, or even frozen spinach, after August 1st, play it safe, consider it possibly contaminated, and throw it out.
Anytime there's an outbreak like this, a lot of people get concerned. What should the worry level be in American households?
The worry level on this one is rather large, not only because the numbers keep increasing, not only the states, but the number of people affected, but because it points to, I think, a real problem in how we get food from the fields to our tables. And that's where a lot of the medical detectives have a lot of work to do over the next couple of days.
Dr. Nancy Snyderman with us from our New York studios tonight. Nancy, thanks for that and welcome. And moving on here from Havana, there is a battle going on in the United States tonight within the Republican Party over the treatment of terrorism suspects. In an often contentious news conference today, President Bush laid down the law as he sees it. Our report tonight from our chief White House correspondent, David Gregory.
The Republican showdown over interrogation rules spilled into the Rose Garden today. The president insisted the CIA must be allowed to secretly use tough measures to interrogate terror suspects.
So Congress has got a decision to make. You want the program to go forward or not? I strongly recommend that this program go forward in order for us to be able to protect America.
And Mr. Bush shot back at his former Secretary of State Colin Powell, who criticized the White House in a letter yesterday, writing, quote, "The world is beginning to doubt the moral basis of our fight against terrorism."
It's unacceptable to think that there's any kind of comparison between the behavior of the United States of America and the action of Islamic extremists who kill innocent women and children to achieve an objective.
But key Republicans in the Senate object to the White House's attempt to reinterpret the Geneva Conventions, which set the rules for the treatment of prisoners. The fear that other countries like Iran or North Korea could turn the tables on the U.S., interpret the Geneva Conventions as they see fit, and torture U.S. military personnel.
I am saying that I would hope that they would adopt the same standards we adopt.
Critics are not so confident, fearing harm to U.S. troops.
General Powell has said, and I feel the same way, this isn't a matter of difference of policy. This is a matter of conscience.
Mr. Bush spoke about other topics today, ruling out a meeting with Iran's leader at next week's UN meeting, and on Iraq, said he regretted that troop levels were rising and not falling as he thought they would be by now.
It looked like that might be the case until the violence started rising in Baghdad.
As for the fight over interrogation rules, the president warned today that if Congress doesn't side with him, the CIA's program will have to be shut down. David Gregory, NBC News, the White House.
And so from Washington, back to what brings us here to this gathering in Havana, Cuba tonight. The U.S., by the way, was invited to attend, but declined. This is the first time any foreign journalists have been allowed into Cuba since Fidel Castro temporarily turned over power to his brother Raul in late July. Our chief foreign affairs correspondent, Andrea Mitchell, is here with me on this trip. And Andrea, you made this point on last night's Nightly News. The guest list looks like the enemies of the United States list.
Indeed it does. 118 countries, though, are represented here, gathered here, and that's 50 heads of state and Kofi Annan from the United Nations. But everyone, Brian, is talking about the man who is not here. The summit's class photo without the leader of the class. Fidel Castro receiving visitors in the hospital, still recovering from surgery. Instead, Cuba and this summit is now led by Fidel's brother Raul, Cuba's longtime defense minister.
Comrade Fidel has asked me to pass on to you his warmest regards.
The countries gathered here last met in Havana in 1979 during the Cold War. Castro was then a vigorous 53-year-old. Now the summit stars are some of George Bush's worst enemies, Iran's President Ahmadinejad. And without Fidel, Venezuela's President Hugo Chavez, seizing the mantle of chief critic of the United States.
American imperialism continues to prepare plans, cooking up conspiracies against the governments of Cuba and Venezuela.
In fact, he jokingly told the summit he would come to Iran's defense if the U.S. invaded. This group includes some American allies, but is largely united behind sharp criticism of U.S. policy in Iraq, as well as throughout the Middle East and Latin America, and demands for more favorable policies toward the developing world. But today in Havana, Cubans were more interested in reading about Castro's health than world politics. She said she is praying for his recovery. Even though Castro was not at the gathering, Cuban officials say he is still making key decisions.
What has changed since he's become ill?
He's very much involved. He has been very much involved in the preparation of the summit.
But most people here, including top government officials, say it is very unlikely that Fidel Castro will ever fully resume the reins of power. The transition to a new group of leaders in Cuba is well underway. Brian?
Andrea, thanks. You can feel it. He truly is the missing man here tonight. We go from here in Havana now back to the United States, and more big news today on what is really the redesign of Ford Motor Company. Last night we told you about the company's buyout offer, which it is extending now to all 75,000 of its union members. Tonight the other shoe has dropped. Now it's management's turn. White-collar layoffs now and plant closings to come. Here is NBC News chief financial correspondent Ann Thompson.
For the small town of Maumee, Ohio, Ford's way to New York.
From Havana, Cuba, we'll take a break this Friday night. When we come back, we will look at the often dangerous, sometimes deadly business of smuggling Cubans to the United States. And later, what did the Pope say that has so many people around the world so angry? We are back now from Havana, Cuba tonight with NBC News In Depth. The Cubans who are willing to risk their lives to leave here and start a new life to the north of here in the United States. It is just, in fact, 90 miles from here to Key West, Florida, the southernmost point in the United States. And under America's immigration policy, a Cuban who makes it to American soil can stay in America. In recent years, the illicit business of smuggling Cubans, has gotten more expensive and more dangerous, as we see tonight from NBC News correspondent Mark Potter.
People in the water. People in the water.
Near Key West, Florida, a life and death emergency aboard a grossly overloaded smuggler's boat.
It's capsized. It's fully upside down.
Although the U.S. Coast Guard rescued 35 Cuban migrants here, 2 women.
We'll take a break. When we come back here tonight, the uproar around the world over a speech by the Pope. Bob Ney, a 6-term Republican congressman from the state of Ohio, today became the first sitting lawmaker to plead guilty to corruption charges stemming from his relationship to disgraced former lobbyist Jack Abramoff. Ney had denied wrongdoing for months, but filed court papers this morning agreeing to a plea bargain. And in it, he admits to accepting tens of thousands of dollars worth of trips, meals, and gifts while trying to win favors for Abramoff. Also, his lawyer said the congressman has entered an alcoholism treatment program. Now we turn to the remarks by the Pope about Islam that today set off a torrent of outrage in the Muslim world around the globe. NBC News correspondent Keith Miller has our report tonight on what the Pope said and what many Muslims are now shouting back at him.
It looks like a clash of civilizations
away back in New York today on Wall Street. A tame inflation report in the U.S. cheered investors. The Dow was up more than 33 points. As a result, NASDAQ gained almost 7 points on the day. For this week's trading, the Dow was up almost 169 points. A strong week. NASDAQ finished up almost 70 points. That's more than 3% of its total value for the week. When we come back after a break here in Havana, Cuba tonight, a look at this land of contradictions. We are back in Havana, Cuba tonight. We happen to be right now in the parking lot of a local supermarket. But for all the contrast you can find here, we might as well be anywhere in this nation. Let's begin in this corner. A car from the United States, late 50s, about the time the curtain came down here and separated Cuba from much of the Western world. These are all over the place, and it's a huge industry preserving them, keeping them up and running. Across the street, beyond this cafe where young people listen to salsa music and order thoroughly Western beverages, the high-rise hotel. This is Cuba's Riviera, a strip of tourist hotels designed to bring outside money in, a lot of it against Castro's better wishes. And over here, the inflatable beer promotion, the same one seen at so many NASCAR races, sporting events in the United States. You're not expecting to see it here in Cuba. There's more. The parking lot attendants, elderly men, veterans of the revolution, hired by Castro, in this case, to help a vintage Soviet-made compact car back out of its parking spot. Nearby, the hulking Cold War-era edifice, the old Soviet embassy. At the beach nearby, a trombone player, pointing at the United States 90 miles away, playing My Way at sunset, and capping off our day in this land of contradictions. And we're back now on our rooftop perch. Just some of our adventures here in Cuba, at least what we were allowed to photograph before various security guards descended upon us. A quick programming note before we go here. Because of our travels and the news today, the Making a Difference segment that we normally air Friday evenings will air on another day next week. For now, that is our broadcast for this Friday night. Thank you for being with us. I'm Brian Williams, reporting tonight from Havana, Cuba. Have a good weekend. Good night.
Monday on Today, First Lady Laura Bush live with Meredith Vieira. Then, never seen before, private moments from the life of JFK Jr. are Today exclusive only on NBC.